Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Off the Block, the podcast where we break down the biggest shifts in crypto, how they intersect with macro, tradfi, and everything in between. So, in essence, we're showing you guys all the exciting things happening on the block and off the blockchain. So, with that said, firstly, I hope you all enjoyed your holiday period. You got the Christmas presents you wanted, maybe some Bitcoin for some of you. Or honestly, if you're down on the year like I am, TradingView Pro couldn't have been a bad gift either. As always, we're kicking off the next stretch of the first season of Off the Block with another round of internal guests. If you remember our first episode, where we unpacked the UK crypto market with Alex, our head of sales for the UK and new markets, today we're moving into the engine room of our business, which is with investment management. So as you can see on the screen, I'm joined today by Konstantina and Krisan, who combined boast more IQ points than my entire bloodline. So thank God that we've got them here, because today we're covering a topic that may seem like folklore, but is actually one of the most interesting trading patterns in Bitcoin. So this episode will really highlight trading Bitcoin in 2026, the lessons from last year, and some signals about what's to come next. And we're doing it through that specific lens of the Chinese New Year trade. Now, to be clear, it's never been about superstition. Chinese New Year matters because of several liquidity mechanics that Konstantina and Krisan will highlight. And Bitcoin, it has matured. It's increasingly traded in line with key macro events than just a standalone crypto trade. So today we'll unpack why the trade worked historically, why it struggled recently, whether it has legs in 2026 and under what conditions, and what could invalidate this framework completely. Now, before we dive into this seminar, I'll let both of our guests, our wonderful guests, introduce themselves, who you are, what you do at 21 Shares, how you got into crypto, and maybe what you guys are spending your time thinking about in markets right now. So, Konstantina, ladies first.
Hi, I'm Konstantina. I'm a senior associate portfolio manager for 21 Shares. I joined a bit less than a year ago. Previously, I was out and about in Ireland and Greece, working in equities and then covering fixed income, specifically emerging markets. And going into crypto was something that was interesting to me since university. I got into it through my mathematics course, where we had some cryptography classes, and that's where the first idea of Bitcoin entered my brain. So I'm very happy to be here. I support the European side of the business and 100% supporting Krisan here, our very own doctor.
Uh, Thanks for that warm introduction, Konstantina. So I'm Krisan, joined 21 Shares about just over 3.5 years ago. Work on the portfolio management piece alongside Konstantina. Prior to that, worked predominantly as a quant trader or quant dev across both equities, commodities, and fixed income markets, both in banks and hedge funds market makers. As to how I got into cryptos in 2013, I went to a dinner where I met someone who was super passionate about Bitcoin. Literally every single dime he had, he just invested in Bitcoin. He was uber passionate. He said this is the future of the coin. I went out to America due to a job I had out there, and that's when I ended up, shall we say, dabbling my fingers into Bitcoin and crypto.
Amazing. Thanks, guys, for both of your introductions. And as you can see, they both, boast quite a lot of experience also outside of crypto. And that kind of leads us as to this amazing report that they've put together around the Chinese New Year, where they're also looking at things outside of our immediate crypto world. And for some of you guys are already well aware that Bitcoin is becoming more macro aligned, and as a result, metrics just within the crypto space are not only what's important, and it's quite powerful to highlight specific trading patterns that can happen around specific seasons. So if you guys recall our episode with Michael Turpin, there we looked really at the seasonality of Bitcoin in a very long-term view from the lens of the halving, right? And we talked about the seasons, how they are in the real world with crypto winter, crypto spring, summer, and autumn. Now, this is a very specific lens into a small window of trading Bitcoin, which is obviously the Chinese New Year. But before we turn it into this full-blown discussion over their amazing report, I think we need to do what we always do, which is a bunch of rapid fire questions. Unfortunately, today, sorry for you guys if you miss him. We don't have our bad cop Darius with us. We just have myself. But I'll split the questions into 5 and 5 for each of you. And keep in mind, keep the answers short. There's no right or wrong answers. And there's no need for disclaimers here. Just give your own piece or opinion. So I'll start with you, Krisan, because I know you're very active trading crypto yourself as well. And given its volatility, I'm sure you'll be pocketing some nice spare change here and there. But what is your favorite crypto asset to trade right now?
Right now, Solana.
Makes sense given, the price action we've seen over the last year has been very choppy and relatively range bound. So I think I'll be taking some notes off you after this call. And for you, Connie, Krisan already mentioned Solana, but out of Bitcoin or Ethereum, which do you prefer from an ideological perspective, and which do you prefer from a trading perspective?
I think both are allied. Bitcoin as the ideological way, it was the beginning. It was the starting idea where Ethereum came off of. So 100% Bitcoin on that side. And then on the trading part, given Bitcoin has been the most active, it's number one. And it continues to create new patterns throughout, together also with the macro regimes, and it doesn't become so crypto specific. This way, I would also pick Bitcoin.
Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, given your background in markets that are outside of crypto and your knowledge and expertise there, and how Bitcoin has become more aligned with that, I think obviously for you, it makes more sense to be trading Bitcoin. Now, quickly, what is one indicator before looking at price, because price can be a disruptive signal, let's say, what is something that you check, or what is an important indicator behind the price action? And I guess this one would be for you, Krisan.
Tough one. I wouldn't necessarily say there's a single indicator that I'd use, but given that you've narrowed the time in how I can answer this question, I'll limit myself to just one. Probably for me is rates. So just general global rates, both in US side, Japanese side, just any major market, just in terms of where both the short and the long end of the curve is going, and in terms of volatility across the curve, that's generally what I'd be monitoring. For me, liquidity is still quite important in terms of where BTC price and general crypto market's going. So yeah, I'd stick to rates.
Sounds good. Now, I know, Krisan, you would have a plethora of answers here, so I'm not going to give you this question. This one's for Connie. If you weren't trading crypto, what markets or what asset class would you be trading instead?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I come from an emerging markets background, and even before Greek equities sometimes do feel like emerging markets. So this has been my bread and butter for so long that if it wasn't crypto, I think it would be emerging market. The volatility is the same if you ask me, depending on where you're at.
Back to the roots then. All
Yeah.
right. Well, I hope, home is not too far if the volatility is quite similar. And then moving over to Krisan, again, you've traded almost every asset under the sun. But if looking across the different vehicles or the different exposure types, whether it's spot investments, future investments, or derivatives and options, where do you spend most of your personal time?
I'll be quite boring in my answer and say all three. Every every instrument has its nuances. They all kind of move simultaneously, in that it's almost a triangle, right? Spots, futures, and options, they're all in sync. One moves out of sync, you can just do an arbitrage on the other two. So it's not necessarily I just focus on options. All three markets give you information. Obviously, from a leverage play, options is a big uplift, but then you need to understand how options work. So yeah, I do all three, to be honest.
All right. Well, I'll pick your brain on some options trading for Solana after this call. My script
Anytime, my friend.
is getting solved as we go. Can't wait. All right. And in your opinion, Connie, what asset or what asset class does Bitcoin trade most like when markets get stressed? Because we've heard this idea, and it's one that we at 21 Shares strongly believe in, that Bitcoin can become a store of value asset like gold, or is already an emerging one. But at times, we've seen that that doesn't hold up when the market gets hot. So, what would you say to that question?
Yeah, there's two sides to it. There's the supporters that do believe it's a store of value, and no matter what happens, they would stick to that. But then there's also the other types of people invested in it. And these types of people, when there's a big market sell-off, they're gonna try to protect themselves from every type of invest they have. So no matter if it was Bitcoin, if it was the S&P, if it was anything, they would be predisposed to sell. So this is what we see like coming through for Bitcoin in a case like this.
And I guess that's related to my next question, which is, given that it is becoming more aligned with macro conditions worldwide, Krisan, would you say that what matters for Bitcoin now more is actually what's going on in the macroeconomic scene, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's kind of numbers on economic data, or do crypto specific sentiment or crypto specific news events, do they drive the needle more still?
I mean, the majority of your play is still going to be from a macro point of view. By macro, I'll go back to my previous answer in terms of it's a liquidity play, and liquidity is all linked to rates. But any crypto-specific event, especially it's a major event, can always have a knock-on effect. We saw something similar on October the 10th, where you had the tweet from Trump kicks the crypto markets. You had some ADLs that knocked in. You had price action going Binance that had a knock-on effect. So it's not completely devoid of crypto-specific events on that part.
That makes sense. Thanks a lot. And I already know the answer for Krisan would be volatility can be your edge in crypto. But Connie, given that maybe you've had less experience in your life at a desk, would you consider it for the average investor? Would you consider it an enemy? Would you consider it just noise, or would you consider it an edge? The volatility that we currently see in the crypto space.
For the average buy and holder, it doesn't matter. So that's out of the question. Now, in order for volatility to be your friend, you need to know how to trade it. If you are comfortable with the volatility and you know the patterns, you know how to act on it, then everything is fine and it can definitely be your friend. But in any other case, it can be quite scary. Now, it shouldn't be. You just need to recognize the patterns and know how to act on it if you want. Otherwise, recognize the partner and stay away. That's as
Makes
simple as
sense.
that.
So, as a trader, it's about recognizing those patterns and accustoming yourself to them and how to act on those. And as a buy and hold investor, one that has a long-term thesis on a specific asset like Bitcoin, there you would treat it as more like noise. And if you have a long-term belief in that asset, it is regardless of price action in the long run. So, I really like that answer as well. Now, Krisan, last year we were promised it's the year of the institutionalization of crypto. And I would argue that in the background, that has happened for a lot of the industry. However, in terms of price action, maybe that didn't quite hold up in the ways that some people had expected. So what is one signal that you think went underweight or under the radar last year that now seems so obvious? And I guess here we're not talking just about Bitcoin, maybe, but about the wider crypto industry.
I think at the start of the year, if you rewind the clock, and it feels a lifetime ago in crypto land, but we'll try and recalibrate our brains to where we were. We had Trump come in. There was this uber bull market, so you could argue the market was already quite high when it came up, almost frothy. The whole Trump and Melania coin action that made it uber bullish, shall we say, again to a frothy degree. And maybe that was one signal we didn't realize would have a kind of knock-on effect further down the road. It took a lot of the heat out at that point. Add on general rate movements, add on the tariff, etc., because that was also people didn't really have a good idea about where that's going to end up. There was a lot of this kind of, shall we say, noise, which was really should have been interpreted as a signaling effect. And all of that was signed off with the whole October the 10th episode. And yeah, it's a sequence of events on that side. But
Makes
I
sense.
think the original point was the events in January, February. People probably should have put more weight into the fact that that's taken a lot of the, shall we say, the P&L out of the trade.
Exactly. Seems as though the year started frothy and then it ended in a liquidation cascade that perhaps we could have uh, seen coming had we, internalized the early bullishness of 2025, which, as you said, does feel like a lifetime ago. I feel like I've had a whole career since the start of last year.
I feel like that already, and it's only Tuesday.
That makes two of us. Now, my last question, because I think this one ties to the broader topic of today. Do you believe, you can trade around specific holiday events? I think we've seen this before with broader global events such as elections, maybe also the 4th of July trade for US investors. But you guys are taking a look through your report at a specific event. So Connie, are you of the belief that, generally speaking, one can trade around holiday events?
Yeah, and we've seen that repeatedly, and usually tend to look at the US and feel like every type of trade you take on, that would be around 4th of July, or it would be around the specific US holidays. But that's not necessarily the case. You have billions of people on the other side of the world, and that's usually ignored. But that's why we're here. And as we'll probably see a bit later, there's already a lot of research going on around the stock market behavior on the Chinese New Year, or in other cultures, it would be something different like Diwali and different holidays.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, the Diwali gold trade is something that I think we can continue banking on for the years to come. At least I hope so, because it's something that I learned from you guys as well. And today we are taking a look, I've said it many times now, but it's about the Chinese New Year. And I'll just flip to the screen here. And, some people may think this is just an event that happens, on the other side of the globe, and therefore it will have no effect on how markets are operating, at least not the US markets or the European markets. But keep in mind, crypto is a global asset that is traded all around the world 24/7. And as such, even though technically speaking, you cannot trade Bitcoin in mainland China, what is true is that you can't force them to not trade Bitcoin around the world, and even in China. So it's not really folklore, right? The trading around the Chinese New Year. As we'll show today, the data does prove otherwise. But maybe, Connie, given that you guys authored this report, I would be happy for you to break down a little bit around what is actually happening in the Chinese New Year, aside, from those of you who are not aware what this holiday is about, but also for myself. It's not just the turning of a new calendar that's happening this year. There's also a lot of other traditions aligning with specific seasons that mean we should take a look at this holiday event. So maybe you can break down what is the Chinese New Year before we really start going into your guys' results.
Yeah, the Chinese New Year is food, if you ask me. No, it's a very long tradition, and it's not about having the new year. It's more about changing. And every year you have the zodiac, and every year you have a different animal representing what's gonna go down and what kind of reflection and how people will behave and should behave and adapt to in the coming year. And for example, the year before we had that, the years of the snake, that was more about self-reflection, transformation, shedding the skin.
That is what crypto kind of went through last year as well, right? You could
True.
argue with the entrance of institutions, we're shedding that old boom bust cycle dynamic of Bitcoin and maybe entering into a new life form. So that's quite
More
interesting as
institutional,
well.
yeah, for sure. And yeah, this year is the year of the fire horse. Now, what that means? It means we have more power, we have more energy, we're ready to go forward, and we're ready to look ahead without much of scared, more low-key attitude to life. And that transforms not only the people and their actions. So what we see around that is a whole week or more of celebration. People take holidays for like the 10-15 days. Uh, Everyone moves around. You have people from all over the world going back to family. China is not a small nation, and it's not only China. You have the same thing going on with Taiwan, Hong Kong, all the big Chinese related nations. So,
So there's like a culmination
yeah.
of events that are happening around, it seems like mid to end of February. We also have, as you said, the Hongbao tradition, where we have the pass down from older to newer generations of some money, and also coinciding with the Chunyun season, where we see a bunch of migration from different people. And I want to
Yeah.
iterate a little bit on what Krisan had mentioned, which was that Bitcoin is trading with liquidity in mind. And with these points that you guys have picked out here, it does seem that around the Chinese New Year, we may also be entering a little bit of a liquidity shock, if you will. Maybe one of you can explain a little bit more about how this is all coming together, and then we can start to get into the results of what we've seen throughout this period.
Yeah. All I can say is I'm still waiting for my hongbao from Dr. Krisan.
I'll also hopefully receive one this year. That would be fantastic.
It's
Yes.
already becoming an expensive podcast for me.
No, this is a very important tradition. It's defined generation and generation. It's the reason people go back home, really. You have these red envelopes where, as you said, the older generation, the parents, sons, uncles, parents, everyone, put some money in it and passes on to the newer generation. Now, if you are a low-income household, that would be as low as $10-20 amount. If you are on the other side in the big cities, the big money, that can be very high very quickly. And especially if you think about the kids and how it works, usually you have one heir. So one person gets a gift from 4 or 5 different relatives. So that can pile up. The thing with the newer generation is that most either live in China or outside of China, but they all are much more connected with what's going on all over the world. That means they know Bitcoin, they're interested in Bitcoin. We know that there's a lot of interest in crypto market in general. So this is a great opportunity for them to get the pocket money and put
Makes
it in all
sense.
these places.
Honestly, for the viewers here, by the time I got to this slide, I still thought, okay, this is, a little bit of a narrative and it's just maybe a self-fulfilling prophecy. But then I got to the next slide and then I saw the proof that was in the pudding, where actually this kind of event does actually affect the trading that we see for Bitcoin around this time period. So I'll quickly turn over to the results page so we can take a look at how this has actually affected Bitcoin throughout the years. And maybe one of you guys can quickly run me through the results, but before we look at it more granularly, because as the data shows, it does seem as though the Chinese New Year has a meaningful effect on the returns witnessed in Bitcoin. So does one of you want to maybe elucidate a little bit on what we're seeing in our screen?
Yeah, I can take that one then. So these are the returns from trading during this Chinese or Lunar New Year. We took the returns from 2018 purely on the basis that that was the first year where you had the CME Bitcoin future listed, so you can argue it became an institutional asset to some degree. So the first column there shows the returns over a 10-day extended window. So that's the start from 10 days prior to the start of the Chinese New Year to 10 days after Chinese New Year. So that's open your trade 10 days prior, close 10 days after. Max return there is showing your maximum return during the window, and the min is by default then the minimum return that you would have accrued during that time. And the second, or rather the last three columns is the same, but 1 day. So 1 day prior, 1 day post on the holding period. And if you just look at the first column, you'll see all returns positive bar the last year.
Makes sense. All right. Well, what happened last year then? Is that does if the setup is historically sound, does that mean something in specific changed last year which rendered this trade as negatively performing, or was there a specific event that led to that?
I mean, I would argue, touched upon it again earlier in the, I think in your 10 questions, the Trump came along
Yep.
as he generally does. Bitcoin ripped through from December onwards. You had also Melania Trump that also pumped the market further. And it was on its downward spiral just prior to the Lunar New Year started. So that took a lot of the heat early on. It's generally not as frothy. It became super frothy. I mean, you could argue it still wasn't too bad given how much deteriorated overall. I mean, -3, -4%. Max return over that period is 5%. So depends upon how you view the data.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I hope that this trade does materialize this year so I could play it out myself. But I think what you mentioned makes a lot of sense. And looking just at a high level without having gone through the report in great detail, I would assume that the current market conditions, given that they aren't that frothy, and actually since the October liquidation event that you mentioned, we've been in quite a downturn. One could reasonably assume that this entrance of new liquidity through the Chinese New Year means that we could see a positive return throughout this period. Again, past performance is not indicative of future results, and it's all dependent on the current market situation. But given that, we don't expect the trade to return or be similar to what we saw in 2025. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess one thing that we could do is also look at where we stand maybe this year, since the Chinese New Year is actually coming up, and it's in almost less than a month. It's in less than a month now. Maybe we could take a look at some of those indicators and signals that both of you had looked at to potentially dictate what could happen this year. So for that, I'll gladly turn to you, Connie. If you guys can, if you can give me some more insights and for our viewers as well as to what do you think this means for Bitcoin heading into this year's potential trade?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to it. The first side would be how does Bitcoin behave compared to FX? So what we've seen is historically when there's a big move on the onshore, offshore Chinese currency, or there's a big move where the one falls against the dollar, then we can see that there's some volatility involved also for Bitcoin. In this specific case of CNY falling against USD, then we see some upward pressure for BTC. Now, as we said before, during the Chinese New Year, we usually get liquidity injections from the People's Bank of China into the market. All of this to satisfy the demand for cash, again, for Hongbao tradition and everything. So what this tends to mean for the currency, it tends to fall.
Yeah.
And this is something we've seen before, and now you can see also on the CNH CNY pair on the bottom right in October when there was this big change and a big jump of the Bitcoin leading up to the all-time high. This is where the CNH CNY pair also jumped. Now, this is one side of it. On the other side, for this year, we've seen a consistent strength going into the Chinese currency. This has been helped by how dollar has been falling against everyone. But this strength is also supported by China. It feels like they're comfortable at these levels, sub 7 right now. But that doesn't mean that this lasts forever.
Yep.
It means that there's preparation potentially for the liquidity injection that's coming in a few weeks, and then that would lead again to the strength to fall, to be reduced, and then that will give way for BTC to rise again.
So,
on the other side, we have on March, we have the 15 5-year plan. Now, I know we're going to touch upon it a bit later, but one thing to consider is that in order for that to come into place and be voted, actions already started from January 1st. So in preparation for that, and we're probably going to talk about it a bit later, in preparation for that, again, the strength of the currency is important right now. And the fact that the government and the Bank of China are ready and prepared for what's to come. So that's a very good environment for the Chinese New Year this time around.
Sounds good. It seems like the conditions, or rather the preconditions, are in place for a better return to the Chinese New Year for Bitcoin as compared to last year. But I just do feel like, and Krisan, we mentioned it when we talked about what happened last year, and there was also the topic of Trump introducing some tariffs during that holiday period. We can't fully rule that out, though, can we? We cannot fully rule out a potential bombshell event within geopolitics, within what Trump may do on a macro level going forward anymore. I mean, as far as my read goes in the current market situation, that risk premium tied to geopolitics has ticked up over the last few weeks and months. So I guess this leads me to the next section, which is going forward. Can we take something like that into account? And if not, what are some things that we should be taking into account for the years ahead as well?
For the years ahead or just for this trade going
Maybe
forward?
let's start with just for this trade, and then we can take it into what we can consider as important factors beyond that.
Okay, I mean, generally just going for this trade, I mean, the Trump, sure, you need to monitor what he says, what he does. Very hard to know forecast ahead on that side. There's also maybe certain, shall we say, localized affairs within China that we need to be mindful of. China, Taiwan, obviously being one of these factors on that side. I think again, any sharp move in BTC leading up to, shall we say, the Lunar New Year is something always also to be mindful of. Any sharp rally, any sharp drop off, it requires a certain level of risk tolerance on anyone taking this trade on because as we typically say, past performance doesn't dictate future performance, shall we say. So it's not necessarily a given, like many things in life. We have a high probability based on, last up from 2018, 1 year being the outlier, shall we say. Yeah, you still have to be mindful about what's going on in the market. It's not so much trading blindly on that part. But if conditions are right, markets are calm, yeah, it's still from a probability point of view, it's still a good trade to take on.
Well, I'll be taking on that trade, and you'll know if I was successful if I'm outside your door with a pitchfork or with a bag of cash, Krisan. So the answer.
Oh, thanks, Max. I'll take the bag of cash from you as well.
Well, let's see. May come with a pitchfork, depending on the results.
A Trojan horse.
Exactly, and it is the year of the horse, right? So
there you go.
rule that one
Boom.
out. Cool. Well, thanks, Krisan. And I think now that leads us to, is this a playbook that we can follow for the years ahead, or is there other considerations that we should be keeping in mind? And I think, Krisan, you already mentioned more broadly speaking with Taiwan and the geopolitical risk. But there's also the notion of the gold trade. And of course, China's central bank has been very active in continuing to purchase physical Bitcoin or gold. And then the idea of a potential electronic or ECNY, the electronic yuan, to promote more demand for their currency, essentially. What are these factors and how do they play into the potential trade? How can an investor maybe, or a trader in this case, take a look at these and kind of use them as a signal rather than treat them as noise?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah. I mean, we spoke about Taiwan. That's the general geopolitical situation we're at. Where gold comes in is that we've seen the situation in Russia, where right now they're able to keep going forward and financing their operations using their gold reserves. They're the fifth largest in the world, and China is number 6. They keep acquiring. They have been buying for 14 months straight. They really want to build a good, solid gold reserve. So this is on one side very helpful to help China in case something goes off in Taiwan. Maybe they get sanctioned. You don't know. And that will be a very good cushion for them. Now, at the same time, what we have forgotten in the past few years is how gold was the standard, and it was how the whole currency system began. And this is something that right now comes back in with the rally of the gold and with precious metal. And what we can see on China's side is we know they want to have a more credible currency. They want to be the alternative currency. And that's, of course, opposing the US, but it's also against the rest of the world. And how you're going to do that, you need to have very good backing. People do not trust China right now. And gold is one way to help build that trust. On the other side, for the NCY, it's not possibility, it's happening right now. From January 1st, as we said before, this is also part of the 15-year plan. the 15 5-year plan. Already, in order to push it forward, they have started giving interest for the holders of ECOY. They're really trying to push it forward. What that means is that it's no more running to the bank, getting the cash, being able to trade it for whatever you want. You have much more controlled currency. What that means is that maybe when the next new year comes, maybe it won't be as easy to go off and exchange this for Bitcoin. This might be a very different situation for the years to come when Hongbao will be handed off through Insewa. And we'll see that in the very long term, yes. This year it's too early, but when the adoption begins spreading, then this is one way to go.
I really, yeah, that point on the ECNY is, I think, quite an interesting one because, as you said, this trade is typically done to turn cash into Bitcoin, and that's something that we've observed over the last few years throughout the Hongbao tradition. And if it were that you are being passed down ECNY, which has quite a strong aspect of government surveillance, and therefore people won't be able to trade it into crypto, obviously because the law forbids it. But now within the currency, the code itself forbids it to be traded into Bitcoin. That means that that trade may not play out in the years ahead as it has done in the past. That is an argument that even someone like myself can follow. So thanks a lot for that. But as you said, I think the adoption or the uptake in ECNY is marginal to say the least. So as of now, it shouldn't affect this year's trading pattern. But on back to gold, do you see this as and maybe we're going a little bit off topic here and going more into philosophy or the broader macro or geopolitical landscape, do you see that as, we've seen a lot of, let's say, currency weaponization coming from the US's side to protect the dollar hegemony. Do you see this as a counter to the US's recent actions? And if so, what does that mean for assets like gold and Bitcoin, generally speaking, that can be treated as store of value assets?
I mean, gold generally has been rallying, I would argue, for both an inflation aspect, but more also as a geopolitical aspect. So touching upon, this whole dollar weaponization. They've taken, lots of countries have taken gold because that's something far more difficult to do. There's also a case of people checking where is my gold stored? Is it in New York Loco, London Loco, or Shanghai Loco? So gold's definitely been, bid up. Ditto on silver as well. You could argue silver has industrial usage to some degree, so it's slightly nuanced than gold, but still there's high demand for precious metals from that aspect. But moving on to Bitcoin's probably tailing insofar as it's lagging a little bit in terms of where it's seen versus gold. But the main point of Bitcoin and some of the beauty of it is it's not controlled by a government. This ECNY, it's controlled by a Chinese government, etc. Bitcoin doesn't have that. It's completely independent of any controlling party, and that's one of its appeals on its side. So maybe the market isn't there yet to take on BTC, but you can see historically, we're quants on this desk, so we like our data analysis on that side. So even adding a small amount of Bitcoin to any portfolio as a tail hedge long term, it's shown resistant, like it's shown its use case on that side. So for me, in any portfolio, having a significant amount of gold and a certain amount of BTC, it's always good on, shall we say, some of these left side events that we don't know. To quote Donald Rumsfeld, it's about unknown unknowns and unknown knowns and known unknowns. So it's always good to have some of these assets in your portfolio.
Oh, Krisan, I'm sorry, but if you throw out many good jokes, you'll have to replace me as moderator. Please slow it
We
down.
can't replace you, Max. You're too good.
Well, I appreciate the insights here, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the report will be coming out around when this episode is aired. So for the viewers here, there may be some of you who just read through the report, and you want to get the insights right from the horse's mouth in the year of the horse. So that's fantastic. Here's where you have them. And if you haven't yet read the report, we hope that this is an intro to the amazing kind of content that our investment management team puts out. And I will be bothering you guys to, do more of this because I think it's fantastic insight and it's a little bit different to the typical content that research produces at 21 Shares, which is maybe more narrative based and with a longer form outlook. And I think things like these are quite interesting for some investors out there that like to also take part of opportunistic trades. So with that said, I think I'll relay to you, Connie, for the final section, a little bit of a wrap up. And if you had to leave our viewers with just a minute or two about what the key important message is here, what would you say to them in terms of what we saw last year, what we expect this year, and what are the things to look out for in the years ahead?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the opportunity of this year, trade Bitcoin during the Chinese New Year. Your window of opportunity is not that confined. You can trade it 1 day before the holiday or 10 days before the holiday, anytime in between. The data shows and the research shows you will tend to have some outperformance. Now, what we have seen so far is that already the yuan has strengthened so much, it's already ready to be going down. And with the liquidity injections that we expect from the People's Bank of China, we will be seeing a certain drop that will help Bitcoin be propped up. It has been lower, much lower than its all-time high, so it has some room to run, and that's something that we can see this year. Now, this doesn't mean it's something we're gonna see next year. Now, for next year, we need to see how China's plans will play out, how geopolitics will play out, and where the world will be in a year's time, because we know 1 year again in crypto and in this market can equal to 20.
Agreed. Again, I still feel like 20 years older from when Melania and Trump launched their own meme coins. So let's see where we are in a year. I mean, usually we end our podcast by doing a bit of a reflection and out forward-looking, predictions. But I think, that's exactly what we've discussed throughout the whole call. So no point in, reinventing the wheel over there. But I do want to relay to you guys if there is anything that you want to add for our viewers here at the end of this podcast. I
Doctor?
take silence as a no. But it's been fantastic having you guys, and let this be a message that I will be participating in this trade, and I will be again, Krisan, outside your door with a pitchfork or a bag of patch. So
I
for
like
all
how
of our,
you've nailed me to the cross on this one.
I mean, I see Konstantina in Zurich every day, so unfortunately, it would have to be you. And for our viewers that may participate as well, feel free to join me. I'd be happy to hand those pitchforks out. All jokes aside, it's been really great having you guys, but also reading through the report. There's a lot of insights that I definitely wouldn't have been aware of without you guys here. So I appreciate both of your times. They're both, very busy. They don't only, produce research and produce cool insights. And please be sure to follow them also on Twitter at 21 Shares Cap Markets. That is a label that is attributed to our capital markets team, but our investment management team does a fantastic job of running that Twitter as well, posting daily news content in the morning before I'm even awake on what's happened the day before. And they, as you guys have heard, have a lot of, expertise and experience, not just in crypto. So you can be sure that what they tell you isn't just noise, isn't just copium. It is a fully fledged out, well thought out insight. So thank you guys. It does seem like the takeaway is that this trade should be able to continue this year as it has done in the past, and that crypto, macro, again, that intersection continues to be one worth exploring. And I guess the biggest risk today, again, isn't being wrong, but it's using a framework that maybe no longer applies. So we'll see if that's the case in a month's time. Thank you both for being on here. Again, feel free to follow them on Twitter. And as always, for our viewers, feel free to like, subscribe, leave comments and feedback. We're always happy to hear feedback, provided that it is constructive. And please be sure to follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you may be listening this to. With that said, it's your host or your co-host without Darius, Max signing off here. And thanks again to our wonderful Team K, Konstantina and Krisan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
Cheers.